Here we go again. Here we go again. Here we go again. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with your Sensei Al Bob. And I'm back. And I thought I'd just jump in for a little bit. Um, you know, I don't know how long this will last. I'm in my 70s and I can remember the 1950s. Does anyone remember the 1950s? And I've had so many different lives. That's one reason I can remember a lot of stuff because, living in Harlem in 1950s was different than living in Long Island in 1960s, And living in Long Island early 1960s was way different than living in Manhattan on Park Avenue, my parents' apartment, and going to prep school, right? And the latter part of the 1960s was definitely different than because I never lived at home. From 1967, I guess, 68, I had my own place. By the time I was 16, 17 years old, I had been working for Grandpa Stoll and Mike, for Mike Stoll, since I was 9. So I was, 16, 17 then. So that was a good, you know, 7 years. Well, I was a pretty good electrician. I had started Local 3 IBEW apprenticeship. And I just the other day, I was clearing things out of the bus and I found here it is Labor Day, right? And so when I was in the union, um, I experienced the union experience, right? And because my mentor, Grandpa Stoll, started the IBEW, he was a real union guy and he was in the higher estuaries of union bureaucracy protocol, and not just the IBEW, but all the other different unions, because they were all starting around, especially in the trades at the same time. And it was a big thing between the guilds and the trades, right? And so that's why in the unions there was the apprentice, there was the journeyman, and there was the master, right? And so and then the master either stayed master in the trade, and that was kind of the guild, and then the union, you could become, you know, a union rep, a steward, a number of things in the union side, the politics side, and being that I was socially active, I wanted to know what it was about. So, when they sent me off to the my first weeks in the union, first I went down to the hall, got to meet and I already knew these guys. I hung out with Grandpa and Mike, right? And Mike's shop was definitely a union shop, and his shop was up on Third Avenue, probably 50 something street. And he was building like he was the guy on the Seagram's building. He was a guy on a lot of the big fancy schmancy apartment buildings that were on Third Avenue and the Upper East Side and then the Upper West Side, and he had the big end restaurants and things of that nature. He did the Museum of Modern Art, and he did the Guggenheim, and he did um, you know things of that nature. So high end, really schmancy. You couldn't screw up. Was just drilling a hole and pulling a wire. It had to be everyone had to be doing their best, right? So working for Mike, I learned to do my best, right? And Grandpa, his shop was the original shop downtown on Duane Street, and he owned a bunch of buildings downtown on Chambers, Duane, Thomas, Hudson. He owned two. He owned Crew and Cone. He owned Mohawk Electric, which was Tesla's laboratory downtown, and I lived in that. That was one of when I had a shop and I had a loft and I was Mr. Artist in Tribeca. I lived. It was right on Duane Park. It was really nice. So anyway, I kind of got to know the union scene, right? And so, um, I did on both ends. So Grandpa, he started IBEW, so his shop was a union shop, but there was a gray zone. There was a lot of work that was done in New York that was couldn't fit under the a union label, right? And so Grandpa's shop was that. It was a union shop. Everyone belonged to the union, but the work wasn't because we worked on all these old factories and we were fixing things. We weren't doing new stuff. We were fixing like 1890 machines, right? Well, along with Zelf. Zelf had a great shop on down in on West. It was in Soho. Uh, it's right off of Spring and started with a W. Green Street, I guess. Was it Green or the other one? Anyway, he had this big building, and the ground floor, the basement, and the second floor were you could he had all kinds of lathes. He had Bridgeports. He manufactured the cogs and gizmos and whistles that went into these ancient machines. And upstairs, he had these warehouses of all these cogs and things that went to these machines. So these guys would have these button machines, especially there was a number of factories that turned out things for draperies and old furniture, especially old hotel furniture, and that would take things and twizzle it around and do this and do that. And if you had to have somebody do it by hand, it would cost a fortune. But these 1890 machines did it, right? And there were no 1950 machines to do any of this kind of stuff. They made stuff in a totally different way. So there were in New York, because New York was a manufacturing town, a union town, definitely, and especially the garment district. And so these machines made things for the garment district too. And we also had machines, you know, that cut material, wove material, made things to put on the clothes. So there was still a lot of manufacturing of doing that kind of stuff for the um, garment district. And there were a lot of warehouses of just ancient clothes still ready to be sold, right? I moved into a factory that was a sweater factory in Williamsburg, and it was the first place to make synthetic factories, like in the 1940s, and uh, and so it had the bodies of the they had machines that could turn out tubes, tubes like sleeves, tubes like the body of the sweater, and then they'd have people sew them together, and I rented this loft. It was 17,000 square feet, and it had miles and miles of tubes of sleeves and tubes for sweaters of different sizes. The guy went out of business, and it was just chock full of this weird ass. Wasn't even polyester; it was some other kind of plastic. And over the years, being exposed to light, because there were lots of windows in this thing, it turned into it's like morphed into alien material. I mean, it was quite interesting. But nobody wanted to clean it out. And the other thing about it, it wasn't off the main elevator. You had to take it down this hallway, down some steps, and then go on to the main elevator that went out to the loading dock. So anyone who wanted to clean that thing out had to do it by hand, right? Nobody wanted to do that. 17,000 square, and the ceiling was like 40 feet high, and it was gigantic space, and it was on the seventh floor of a six-story building, right? So it was quite interesting, and no one had rented that thing out since that company went out of business, which was like in the 40s, and so the utilities didn't even know it existed. When I went in there, and the utilities were on, the gas and electric were on, and I just called up. I said, "So at this address, um, is there a how many floors does that building have?" And they looked it up, and they said, "Oh, 6 floors." And I was on the seventh floor. I said, "Oh, okay," because I couldn't find the meters. They weren't where the other meters were. So I couldn't find it. And the utility company said there were 6 floors on a seventh floor building. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. How about a thumbs up? Thank you very much. And I'm talking about the labor movement in New York since it's Labor Day. And so um, I was doing a lot of stuff. So Mike Finelli was my other grandfather, and he was a mobster. And instead of doing drugs or prostitution or numbers or protection, his racket was hotel and restaurant napkins and tablecloths. Um, in New York, they had these. He had these little biscuits that were about this round, and they were like their own French baguette, right? And he had these special ovens, so these restaurants would have all of these baguettes in these ovens, and when you get a basket, they were crispy and hot on the outside, and the inside was unbelievably doughy, not doughy, but just French bread to the max. And it was in Hotel Bar Butter. I don't know if they even you see it anymore, but they had pads of butter individually wrapped. And Mr. Hotel Bar Butter was buddies with Mike, and he did that on purpose because you would get this roll and you get this pat of butter and you would take the wrapping off and your thumb would still be on the wrapping and you crack the bread and you'd stuff the butter into that hot bread and take out the um, thing and push it back together, count to three, and bite into it. And it was crunchy on the outside and bready with butter on the inside. Fresh, you know, whole cream butter. It was like orgasm. So that was like New York was well known for these rolls, right? And that was Mike things. And the other thing Mike had was if you're going to have beer, you have the keg of beer, you have the refrigerator, you have the hoses, and then you have the tap. And to get a tap, you had to go. You could get the beer from the beer company. You could get the refrigerator and the hoses from that guy. But to get a tap, you had to go through Mike. And you had to pay rent on the tap. You didn't buy the tap, you rented the tap. So this guy had the bread, the tablecloths, the napkins, and the beer taps. And his thumb was in everything restaurant, right? And he was part of the union of the people who worked in restaurants. So that was his union thing. So as I grew up from 9, till 30, when did I leave New York? Oh, I guess I was 38. I was involved in all that stuff, right? And when movies came back to New York, I mean, they were always kind of made there, but not a lot. But then TV shows were being made there, and et cetera, et cetera. And they, because I was in the theater, because I was worked for Lester Polikoff as his best boy, and I knew all of these people who were producing TV shows. Like a good example would be Law and Order, right? And so they would need, so I got into Naboth and IATSE. Naboth was, I think, the theater guy, and IATSE was the movie guy. And the one thing, and I was part of this local 33, I think was 34, but a local where all I did was there was the big generator, right? And there was a guy, and a generator usually on a big truck, and the guy who drove the truck took care of the diesel part of the generator, right? Made sure it could start, made sure it ran at the right horsepower and RPMs. And I took care of the generator, the electric part, the distribution part, right? And the grips and all those guys, they would come with me there with their cords, and I would plug them in, and I would distribute the current so there'd be no loss, no clipping, no flashing, no shorts, no leakage, none of the above, right? So that was my job. So I was busy for the first 2 hours of the shoot, but I had to stay there for the whole thing, right? Take 16, 15 hours. But, I had my own little, IATSE van that had all my little tools and et cetera and spare parts. And so I wouldn't have to go running around looking for anything. I pretty much had, if something broke, I had whatever it needed to fix it, right? At the very least, I would drive in a new truck, but, if it was something simple, I could do it, right? Condenser or this or that, I could do it. But the nicest thing about this was as nice as any of those. It was the same kind of RV that the Star had. I mean, I had a nice bed, a kitchen, a bathroom, everything I need to be comfy, right? And I had my little radio, and all I did was, I'd set it up. First 2 hours, I'd be busy, get everything running. Everything was good. I'd stick around for the first half hour of them shooting and stuff. And then, the ME of the grips, I had to mainline to him. If he had a problem, "Hey, Al, something's going on," and I'd be right out, right? So I would hang out in there. I'd make dinner, and the catering guys always had food. I'd take a couple of trays into my RV, and girls would come and hang out. And there were always um, fluffers and you know band aids there, and so you know, I had a pretty good time that year and a half I did it. Then they started putting video review, and I was Mr. Video, so I was at the very beginning of that. I worked on a Woody Allen movie where I that was the first guy. That's all, and all I did was play. Hit the button, record, hit the button, stop, hit the button, rewind, hit the and that's all I did, and I got paid $40 an hour for that. So between those 3 jobs, in IATSE, I could work 90 hours a week and do nothing. Read books, wrote stuff, was involved in all kinds of other things. But, I had to be within a block or 2 of the radio call. I had to be pretty much on call. And, I mean, I couldn't go do something else, really go do something else. I mean, people could come to me and we could do something else, but and I could go. I mean, if there was a really nice restaurant in the neighborhood, yeah, I could go over there and meet people and have a good time. But I had to have that little walkie-talkie in my pocket and a little thing in my ear. And if they called me, I had to show up. So I had a good experience of what unions were. And in the very beginning, so I show up at the IBEW apprentice program, and we're supposed to go to electric school, right? And everyone in they don't know anything. Now I've already been working, I'm like 17 when I start this, so 10, 11, 12, like 8 years. And I'm, Grandpa still would send me off and work on things all by myself. Same with Mike, he would send me off to do things all by myself. He could trust it. I would do it. I'd be clear. I'd be 100%. I knew what I was doing. And so even though I was like his son, and I was under the son clause of both of these guys, so I didn't have to. Wasn't 9 years old, not supposed to really be working, but they put me on the W-2, from the time I was 9, because New York City, to get your master's license, you need 16 years consecutive W-2 forms. I mean, basically, everyone who's got a master's license in the old school was, a son, and that was Mike, Junior. He hated being called Junior, so he was Mike. Grandpa was Grandpa, and so, and then Mike was Mike Senior, Grandpa Stoll. He was the first to have a master electrician's license in the United States. He was Nikola Tesla's bench electrician. All that stuff that Tesla dreamt up in his mind and just made a drawing, Grandpa had to like turn it into a mechanical device. So that's where I learned how to be an electrician, from those guys, right? That's why I am the magician of the EMF. That was one of my you know nicknames when I was in Australia doing work. This one we had I was part of the Circus Oz, and we took our show all over Asia. And we were in New Zealand. We were in what is that place called? The capital, Christchurch or something like that. So we were in a big theater, and we rigged the frigging circus into a big theater, right? High wire, trapeze, all the above. And I, totally the limited lighting that house had did not, go to what our show was. So I had to like almost rewire that whole place. And I did it in about, and the current coming in was totally inadequate to what we needed. So I just, took it straight on. I jacked up the transformer was right outside the theater, right? I just switched the the lugs on the taps and took high voltage into the theater, and where the distribution was, I put a transformer and then put, temporary panels all over the place. And I did that like in a week. And I got the fire inspector and electrical inspector of that city to come down and say, "This is what I'm going to do." And they said, "How? What? Huh? What? How you going to do that?" I said, "Let me do it, and then you come and take a look. And you can come. I'll give you a call in about a week, and I'll be almost done, and you'll come see what I did." And I said, "Okay." So I did, and the guy of the utility company, he always wanted to be in the movies, right? He was like, and so once I said, "This is what I'm going to do," he said, "Wow!" And so he actually did it for me, right? It was his equipment, his everything. He did it. He said, "That's a great idea." I just kept saying, "Well, let's do it this way." That's a great idea. He never said, "We can't do it that way." That's a great idea. And basically, after I left, he took over and he started his own company that when, they started making movies in New Zealand, like all of the, Lord of the Ring movies, he did all of their power, all of their everything, all of their lighting, and I was his little pebble in the pond of inspiration because he was just working for the utility company. I mean, smart guy. He was on top. He was young. He was go getter. And I said, "This is what I want to do." "That's a great idea, right? This is how I want to do it." "That's a grand. Oh yeah, that's a great." And I gave him the impetus to have the confidence to go up and do that. And then, if you guys like the Lord of the Ring movies, it's because I inspired the guy who brought the electricity because he went out there in the middle of nowhere and brought, a city's worth of electricity so they can make those movies. That's how the world works, gang. You're involved in everything. Your life is not about you. And the best part of the unions was that it had that thing, but it got corrupted. The large corporations got into it, corrupted them, and now that's why unions died. And now workers are right kind of back where they were in the 1880s, and it's going to be we're right now next 3 years will really be, you know, it's just as I've been saying that for the last 30 years. Since about 1996 is when I started seeing, when I saw that Bill Clinton deregulated everything. I mean, Ronald Reagan was talking about it. Bill Clinton did it, right? And what happened was, when Georgie H. got to be president, everyone thought he would just pick up from where Ronald Reagan, but he went right lane, and he went straight into world politics and brought us supersized globalization. You know, Richard Nixon broke the egg on that, but Georgie, brought it to fruition to where it is now. And you know, I was at the CFR kind of when all that was going down, and I was and my two mentors were just about dead and really just disappointed with life. Right? And they just wanted to die. Now I'm not, I'm still alive. I mean, I've already died 7 times, and I keep coming back because I agreed to stick it out, and so I'm going to stick it out. And I always have a good time. Meaning, so the last 4 years, I'm mostly been out here in the woods. Now, I've had this property 20 years, but the last 4 years I've been here the most I've ever been here, right? And what's truly interesting, I realize that this area is not just, it's super rural. I mean, most people, this is a rural area, no. All the places around Roanoke that, they call rural, like Floyd and Beckley and all those kind of places. No, they're suburban compared to this. I'm like in the Cherokee National Forest, right? I'm in a national forest. But the thing about national forests is they were set up by good old Teddy. And Teddy was a mother F He just loved to kill people. He loved war. Spanish American War, you name it, war. He wanted in, right? And he felt that way about him and the worst two presidents I feel, Woodrow Wilson and Bill Clinton, two worst, right? Next two worst are um, Teddy and Mr. Trail of Tears. Um, and I mean, and that is from Lincoln. No, no, from the first five are in their own little category because they were pretty much all founding fathers, and they were just getting everything in line. And you know, and the worker was just a slave, whether you were white or black, yellow, whatever. You know, you didn't own property. You were a slave. Period. And we're in that component part. It doesn't matter what you get paid. If your salary goes up, inflation eats the rest. I mean, they were happy to give the guy $15 an hour because that meant all these companies could jack their prices, like the Dollar Tree. Well, always sell you this piece of crap for $1, no matter what. And they did a pretty good job for about 10 years. And then one day it was $1.25, everything, right? And people's salaries. I mean, people are still working for $8 an hour down at the, McDonald's. So what's going to replace that? When the workers you just say, "Fuck this, not going to work." Period. I'm rather die, and that's kind of where the unions of the 1890s. I mean, they went to war. You know, Mother Courage. And so we are at that today, being Labor Day 2022. Is a benchmark period, and from this point on, I mean, with JoJo's speech about the deploy, the MAGA. No, no, the MAGA guys are American citizens. Whatever they believe is whatever they believe. And you have to realize that um, Donald Trump and JoJo are working on the same team. They represent the hidden hand. They do not represent any constituency of voters. Those folks have just been cajoled to drink the Kool-Aid to believe in whatever that moron says. I mean, either one. They're both. I mean, JoJo. I mean, Jimmy Dore loves to roll out, you know, good old videos of JoJo going. The guy is like totally. His brain has been wiped. They just got enough space. Where the USB port is. And he can do a speech like the one he did about. The terrible Magami guys. Those guys aren't any more terrible than you know, you know, what's his name? What's his name is even worse than the Magamis. Hillary and what's his name from Vermont, Bernie. Because Bernie, I mean, Hillary, he's running against Hillary, and he has rallies with 60,000 people in a football stadium. She can't even fill a high school, you know, gymnasium. She got about 20 people, and she wins. No, basically, they said to Bernie, "Listen, you want power, you don't want a position in the Democratic Party. Just roll over, let Hillary. We want Donald Trump to be president because." Then we can be the loyal opposition and snipe at him, and he will take the Republican Party down the drain, which he has. Republican Party is not the Republican Party anymore. It is the insane, the what do I call it? The neo insane clown party. That's what it is, right? And guys like, Moscow Mitch, if we give everyone health care, this will be Sweden. I lived in Sweden. It's not a bad place. A little cold. I would have a little. I had a hard time with half the year always have being sunny, the other half always being night. That was a little difficult, but otherwise, I like that place. And it allowed me to do a lot of interesting things, right? And I didn't, because there's only one of me. They said, sure. If there were more of me, probably get upset and think I was a movement or something. But see, I'm never a movement because I get involved in something. I get good at doing it. I do it really well. And then something else comes in my view that I kind of go through that thing, do it really well, get to this place, and then I'd have to just do it again and again and again. And I don't want to do that. So something right about there comes in my, oh, I can go do that. Oh, I can go do this. Oh, I can go do that. And that's what I've done my whole life. Right? I've gotten involved in something, gotten to the point, and every minute of whatever I'm doing in it, I did it really well, did my best, and I got to a point where I was one of the guys who was really good at this, and I would do it and do it. But then I got to a point of that's, if I were to stay at that, there was no other place for me to go within that construct. I'd have to just do it like when I was in IATSE, being Mr. Generator Boy and Mr. Video Boy. There was a point where I could, and this is like in the 1980s, early 80s, early 80s, yeah, early 80s. I could miss when I had my video company. I could just working, not have my company, not doing anything on my own, just working in the union structure. I could make easy a 90 to 200 grand a year. And there were all kinds of things I could put that money in and it'd virtually be tax free, right? Could have done that. But I'd be doing the same thing over and over. And I looked at all the guys who were at the level of where I was. And I actually, in 1980, 30 years old, I was above most of those guys who had been in it already 20 years, right? They're all generator guys. And I was going into video and generator guy. And so, and I was making my own, but it was all I was doing was pushing. And every time I would have a technical, what do you think about? That's not your job. Just push the button. Okay. I remember one time I did a thing and I did, work my 8 hours at $38 an hour. And then overtime, I worked another 8 hours and got $110. And then I worked another 8 hours and I got $200 an hour. $108 an hour is pretty good. $200 an hour. And I did such a good job. The producer came over and said, "You really, everyone else, you hung in there. You did a great, and if it wasn't for you, we'd be behind schedule." So he gave me an envelope. Opened it up. It's $3,000 in there. 30 Benjamins. Right? Thanks a lot. That's what I had to look forward to for 20 years. Now I could have made a lot of money, and then, and all those guys just ate it and drank it away. I mean, I had my own little RV that was as good as the stars, and the food guys loved me and would give me trays of food to take in. They would like deliver it in there, big things of lasagna and fish, and I'd eat it all. And I was working hard because I wasn't just working there; I was working at all the other things I was doing. So I was running around a lot, and I hadn't married my second wife yet, so. Um, and that's one reason I didn't do that job anymore. Half of my job was to make her happy. And that's what life is about. So I could have been making $1 million a year as just an electrician and without even having the worry of having a business, because I have loads of friends who, whereas, they were like me, artists, tradesfolk, and were like me, really good at what I had friends who were plumbers, who were masons, who were painters, and they were artists and they were good artists, but by doing this and that, they couldn't schmooze the way, and my work always put me in the schmooze lane, and they weren't schmoozers like me, and so they just decided they could, and they would all get married. They'd all have that first kid, and that was it. They, doubled down on their business, and they all have really good businesses. They all have the plumber's master, and to become a master plumber in New York is really tough way, mine was, yes, I was very good at what I did. Yes, I knew everything about it. Yes, but if I didn't have Mike and Mike, I would not be the electrician I am today. So they kept pushing me into other fields and other things and putting me with other people that expanded my abilities. And no other employer does that. Those guys treated me, Mike Jr., Mike, treated me um, like his son, right? And my grandpa treated me like his son, like his adept, like I was something. Yes, he loved his biological son, but and they loved each other, but they kind of tussled at it. Like I said, Mike hated being called Junior. But they both treated me like their son and above that. Right? I got more fatherly love from Mike than my father, than my biological father, my sperm donor. Right? So no one's watching, and it's 35-35. So all I can say about the unions is that when they work, they're a very good organization, and they usually brings out the best in a lot of people. So in the New York City, the IBEW was truly a social active entity, meaning it it funded a thing called the Boys Vacation Fund and the Girls Athletic League, and we helped maybe 100,000 kids not die on the street. Had gyms and facilities and people there to mentor them and to tutor them, and we had camps, summer camps where we get 30 to 50,000 kids out of New York City in the hot. Otherwise they'd be on the streets all the day, and God knows what they get into. And I got really involved in that. When I was in that union, when they made me a union, I was the youngest union rep. I was 20 years old as a union rep. And it was like all the older guys, I would go to these rep meetings, they're all in their 50s, and I'm 20. And I got all these great ideas. Kids, slow down. Well, we can do this, we can do that, we can, and they would push me over into the things where they were kind of doing that. But nobody, no, the union had already just gone into the money part and was like, but they had all these social active entities, and they were existing on their own inertia, right? And the guys who supposed to be watching out over and didn't want to do it, they just said, well, "You're into here. Here's the keys. Go drive the Maserati. Go on, make us proud." And I did for about a year and a half, and I worked on the World Trade Center. And when I worked on the World Trade Center, I was very, I was like intimately involved in building every floor of the South Tower. Right, in that I worked on this thing called the Greenlee 119 or 113, and it was a bench press, meaning it was this big hydraulic device, and you could bend galvanized everything from a 6-inch down to a 1-inch piece of pipe, and it had these knobs on it, and you would slide them across a rail, and you kind of had to do a little arithmetic because you were going to use this hydraulic device to bend this pipe and make 90s or 45s. But the really groovy thing about this thing is you could set these knobs in different places in these little dials, and would not just do a 40 or a 90. It could do a 45 here and 90 over there, and then an offset at the end, right? Which would be impossible if you were going to use a shoe. And the shoe is the same kind of hydraulic thing, but that you move it around physically. This thing, you stuck it on there, and you stuck the pipe on this thing, you put it in a jig, and then you move these knobs around, and it had to be placed just right, or you wouldn't get the bend just right. So you had to think backwards, inside, not only backwards, but inside out. So I have dyslexia, so I saw it backwards and inside out. It was like the Greenlee guy tried to explain it to me. He said, "Got to use the slide rule." And you got to. I said, "No, no, no." And I did a few, and he goes, "You can just see this, can't you?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "My boss can do the same thing. He invented this." He goes, he said he just sees it. I said, "That's right. I got dyslexia. I can see this. I can see inside out and backwards." He goes, "That's what my boss says." So I did that. So for a good 8 months, I was like, they built a little plywood house over on the side, and they would give me a list of like maybe somewhere between 60 and 200 bends of something between 6-inch and 1-inch pipe, right? And it was like a bend list, right? Anyway, so how it worked is that I would come to work at 6 in the morning. The guy, and each floor had a guy who was overseeing virtually everything, all the different trades, right? Keeping an eye on everything, right? And they had, I don't know, they had 20 of these guys, and they would just, flip floors, right? And but it would take a lot of organizing to get to that day when they would start working on the floor, and then the other guys would be working on getting everything ready to work on their floor. And the building was like, the World Trade Center towers were built like they were built in a factory. And so each of those floors were an acre big. Like an acre, like on a farm, big, right? None of the floors had columns. Most steel buildings had columns holding the floor up. The floor was not held up by columns. The floor was held up by two things: the outside wall, which was a cage of gigantic steel. That's why the windows were so small. It was mostly steel on the outside. And the inside core, where the elevators and staircases were, and that was all steel and cinder block and concrete, right? And so the floors were set up. Um, First, the core would be brought up to where the ceiling was, and steel went past it. And they would put, when you go into a big box store and you look up at the ceiling, that was what they would first tack on. And so they had these kind of I beams that were made out of rebar and corrugated steel, and they would put that up, right? And then the structure was 4 feet of steel, rebar, um, aircraft cable, the kind of cable that they hold up like the George Washington Bridge was put that way because they would do a reinforced stress concrete. They'd pour it, and then they would pull those wires, and they put stress on everything, and then the concrete would set up, and then they would ease on, the turnbuckles on the that. But it was at that stress, but they'd let it off a little bit, so the cables weren't always in stress, but the cables were holding everything in a stressed way, and the rebar was that thick, and it was like, spider's webs, and all the electric pipes and all the plumbing pipes were woven into that, right? And it was 4 foot thick, acre big, and it was even if the central core wasn't there, it would its structuralness was all the way through because the central core was just about, I would say 10% of the center part. 10% of that big acre was the core, right? Everything else was the floor. So when they said that, the pancake, no, because when you look at that film, you see the whole building being turned into a waterfall of dust. There are no big chunks flying around, which there should have been, because this was just one gigantic thing of concrete, rebar, steel, and you didn't see anything. All I saw was dust. The only way you could do that was change the atomic structure of everything. Only way you could do that is to hit it with a scalar weapon from space, and you change that, hard concrete, steely thing into dust. And that's what you see when go watch that. I'm sure they have that, Towers, 9/11, that thing that they played over and over, and it was just a waterfall of dust. There were no big chunks flying anywhere. There was a few explosions here or there, but that was had nothing to do with, they were doing something else. But the thing that turned it to dust was a scalar weapon from space. And if you go to the the federal government wasn't, George W. and Dick weren't going to do any kind of investigation. It's Al Qaeda. I mean, 20 seconds after the building fell down, it's Al Qaeda. How did they find out? What kind of investigation? What kind of forensics did they? Did they investigate anything? No. They had the dump trucks lined up before the airplanes hit the buildings, and they couldn't. The World Trade Centers were designed to take a hit by two 707s at the same time. Not one, two. And 707, older aircraft, more clunky, more steel, more heavy, you know, 757, 767 that hit those buildings are like a thermos bottle with wings. There was no structure, there's no structural anything to a modern aircraft. They're very light, right? And the heaviest thing are the engines. And they never found those. They found one on, Greenwich Street, like they dropped it there. I mean, there was no forensic anything. And like I said, they had the dump trucks ready. They were pulling garbage out of there the night after the buildings came down. And they just kept at it, truck after truck. And part of the stuff, it was straight, that movie with Willis, Die Hard movie where they rob the gold bullion. I mean, that's really what happened. That was a lot of things happened, but that was one of the things they did. So, anyway, and that all goes back to the good old shut down. You are sure you want to shut down your computer? Cancel. So, how much juice do I have? Well, 34%. I don't know where, who wanted me to shut it down, not me. But I'm going to go anyway. I'm hungry. I'm going to go make dinner. I have to drive home and I have to make dinner. So anyway, that's my double barreled Labor Day extravaganza for you guys. And good luck. You know, I'm going to die soon. I'm 77. I got 10, 20 years at best, and I live every day like I'm going to die, and so I live every moment of my life as my last moment. I live and I love every little bit of my life. Period. That's it. I love everything I do. I love everyone I come in contact, whether they're jerks or mean or cruel or anything. I love everyone I see. And if you could do that, and that's why I do this show. I do this as an example for you to do that. If you could do that, you could have a good life, no matter what you do. And if you did that, you would be an example for someone else. And then that person would be an example for someone else. And before you know it, we'd have a pretty nice world instead of the shithole we got right now because we got wars everywhere, got children dying. This is always the stupidest thing. To make sure the plant doesn't blow up, you have to have power from someplace else to keep the you know coolant going. And right now, the coolants in those reactors and those fuel ponds are only being run on backup power. And backup power is, I ran those machines for a couple of years. They are for backup, not to be run 24/7. And so if that backup power goes and they cannot cool even though let's say they haven't shut down, there's two reactors still going, but the three that or the four that are been shut down, they still need to be cooled because there's still fuel in there going through a fissionable process. And there are swimming pools full of spent fuel rods that need to be cooled because they're still going through a fissionable process. And if you don't have coolant, you get a Fukushima. And look how quickly Fukushima, those once they lost coolant, each of those buildings blew up, and not by a nuclear explosion. But what happened was, so there's a ton of water around these cores and around these um, fuel ponds, and it has to be moving and cooling and taking the heat away all the time. As soon as that stops, that water starts to boil. And it gets hotter and hotter and hotter to the point where that water is goes straight to hydrogen and oxygen. So then you have a extremely hot core that's maybe 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit and highly enriched environment because they're in buildings. So the If that was open to the air, it could escape, but that highly enriched hydrogen oxygen environment is somewhat radioactive, so they don't want to let it out. And that's when one little spark, you got oxygen, hydrogen, it's a rocket engine, boom. And go look at I'm sure it's on, they had four, Fukushima, they had four Westinghouse reactors, all four blew up. And it's not, so why, Chernobyl was so bad. It was that reactor was a graphite mediated reactor, meaning it wasn't mediated by water, it was by graphite. And the first reactor ever made was done in a squash court by Fermi in the Chicago University, and it was graphite mediated, right? And so if that sucker ever caught fire, and this is what happened in Chernobyl. It wasn't a nuclear explosion, it just got so hot that the graphite caught fire. And then graphite burns and burns and burns and burns once it's going, and they couldn't put it out. And so it burnt so hot and so much smoke from that graphite. The smoke went up into the troposphere that then got spread across the planet. That was one reactor. These guys got six, but it's not graphite. So what will happen if they have a Fukushima experience? Those plants are built right in the most fertile land on planet Earth, where 20% of all grains to the world comes from. Those plants blow up, that 100 square mile area will be contaminated, and you will not be able to grow that food anymore. Period. So, and they're still screwing around. I mean, the Russians blew out the electric wires. That has to be on the generator, right? And they turn off the oil, the gas, so to Germany. And period. It'll be for 3 days. And now they said, nope, it's off for good. You got it. You get rid of the economic things on us, or we're just keeping it off. Well, I mean, war. There is no good guy, bad guy in a war. There is no good war. This war did not have to happen. This is the war of the Vlads. And there's the Vlad Putin and there's Vlad Ukraine, and they're just reading the script and they're doing what they're told. And we're going for this. The Mr. Globaloney. This was supposed to be happening in 2050, where all the kids would be grown up by then, and they would be mesmerized by their devices, and they could be told to do whatever they want. But that's not happening, and so they got to rush. And so whenever you rush to do something, you make some serious mistakes, and we're watching the serious mistakes all around us because it's not just the war of the two Vlads. It's Carrot Head and JoJo and Moscow Mitch and everyone. Every politician on this globe is purchased. You know, and no one is serving the general good, and because that's not what the hidden hand wants. The hidden hand has a agenda to basically kill off 5 billion people, and the rest will be a slave race, and they will live out in space in their nice condos, and you know, there've been tons of movies made about it. Um, H.G. Wells had a great one, "Things to Come," or of tomorrow, or something like that. But anyway, I'm getting hungry and I want to go have dinner, and I need to charge this guy up. And there's one person now watching this, which is probably the corporate state. I'm telling you guys, hire me. I'm ready for employment. Put me back in line, coach. I'm your guy because I'm not ideologically. I don't care. All I want is to serve love's co-creation. And Love's Coach, we're going to get there one way or other. If it takes another 900 years of dark age, or whether right now is a point we could step into a better life. We don't have to kill 5 billion people. We don't have to enslave the human race. And you, 1/10 of 1%, who will be the ruling class, will be pretty freaking boring. Go watch, Zardos. The people who were the ruling class they were as much in jail, if not more, you know, because they were transhuman. They were going to live forever, and it just got more and more miserable. The mud puppets on the outside of the dome, they at least got to die. So, um, you know, the sperm is bad, the gun is good. Go watch Stardust.